According to a new report published today, the cost of food for the average family will increase by $1,000 next year to $16,300. It is not affordable for average families, and it's the result of this government's inflationary policies. 1 out of 5 Canadians is skipping meals because they cannot pay the grocery bill. When will this government stop with its inflationary policies so Canadians can put food on the table? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are not the only ones facing high food prices. We know this is a difficulty for Canadians. We also know that extreme weather conditions have led to poor harvests, and problems in the supply chain have made food prices go up. That is why we have a plan to double the GST credit, offer dental insurance, support rent payments. We are taking action. The Conservatives are voting against our measures. The Right Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
A farm with 5,000 acres, what an average farm, would pay $150,000 in carbon taxes that are already driving up the cost of food because they get passed on to the consumer. Food prices are expected to be up $1,000 for the average family to $16,000 a year to feed the average family, an incredible sum. In fact, the Mississauga Food Bank reports that some people have even said that the poverty is so grinding, they're asking for help with medical assistance in dying. We need to feed our people. Why doesn't the government reverse its inflationary policy so people can afford to eat and live?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we remain committed to supporting people get out of poverty. And in fact, we understand how difficult life is right now, which is why we have put forward numerous measures to help the most vulnerable Canadians. However, if the Leader of the Opposition is indeed sincere in his desire to help lift Canadians out of poverty, he would have voted for measures like the Canada Dental Benefit or the Canada Housing Benefit, or perhaps childcare, which right across the country fees are being reduced by 50%. But instead of doing that, he voted against it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
More bad news, Mr. Speaker. Families can expect to pay another $1,100 on their grocery bills on top of 40-year high food inflation, according to a recent report. Canadian families will be paying an average of $16,000 annually on their grocery bills next year. And the cause? Too many dollars chasing too few goods. Liberal inflation and the carbon tax have already driven up the costs on home heating, gas and groceries, and they'll make it even worse when they triple their carbon tax. So why won't the Liberals stop forcing their failed inflationary carbon tax on cash-strapped Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, Canada and Canadians are not alone in facing high prices around the world. It's true that extreme weather has led to very bad harvests, and, Mr. Speaker, supply chain issues are still causing food prices to rise, which is why, Mr. Speaker, we have put in place supports to provide housing opportunities for Canadians, to double the GST tax credit, Mr. Speaker, also to put in place dental supports. And, Mr. Speaker, if the Conservatives are serious about getting some supports to Canadians, they can support the government and vote with the Fall Economic Statement C-32.
Well, member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Speaker, that minister from Alberta knows full well Albertans overwhelmingly rejected the Costly Coalition's carbon tax. The Albertans gave the provincial government a resounding mandate to scrap the NDP carbon tax that drove away jobs and that drove away our economy. And now they plan on tripling the carbon tax on gas, groceries and home heating. Why won't that minister stand with Albertans, with Canadians, stand up against his leave-it-in-the-ground left Prime Minister, give Canadians a break so that they don't have to choose between eating and heating?
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, let me remind my honourable colleague from Calgary that the heat dome that caused people to die in my riding of Edmonton Centre, that the atmospheric river that drowned parts of British Columbia, that people in my riding in the middle of a pandemic, Mr. Speaker, did not say hurry up on the childcare, though they wanted that. They did not say give us more supports on COVID, though they wanted that. What did they say, Mr. Speaker? Fight climate change, make sure that we can have a future for our kids. The other side doesn't understand market economics. We do, and that's what's going to help Canadians and Albertans.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Well, Mr. Mr. Speaker, the NDP Liberals' record inflation means that Canadians can't afford to eat. Half of Canadians are already forced to cut back on healthy food. 1.5 million Canadians had to visit a food bank in a single month, and families will have to spend over $1,000 more on food next year. The Liberals' out-of-control spending and their ever-increasing carbon tax makes everything more expensive. So when will the Liberals give Canadians a break and stop forcing their failed carbon tax on struggling Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Last Thursday, Mr. Speaker, I was in London, Ontario with the Prime Minister to announce the Canada Dental benefit was open for applications. I had the opportunity to actually talk with families about how important this is for them and for their children. $1,300 over 2 years, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that low-income kids go to the dentist. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have had opportunities to support vulnerable Canadians time and time again. They have voted against them each time. I hope we can count on their support with the fall economic statement so we can deliver that badly needed support to Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Lakeland.
But, Mr. Speaker, most Canadians can hardly afford to make ends meet, and even the Bank of Canada governor says that this record inflation is a made-in-Canada problem caused by NDP Liberal out-of-control spending. Taxes, because of these Liberals, now cost Canadians 10% more than food, shelter, and clothing combined. Half of Canadians would go broke over a $7,000 expense. But the NDP Liberals, they're going to take even more away. They're out of touch, and Canadians are out of money. So when will they axe their failed carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I think if we want to set the record straight and talk about which side of this House is actually putting more money in the pockets of Canadians, it's the government side, Mr. Speaker. That member and her colleagues just last week voted against tax cuts and tax breaks and supports directly to Canadians, Mr. Speaker. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, take a look at the remarks from Stephen Paulos, who said that our investments during the pandemic not only supported Canadians, they prevented and staved off a period of deflation. What is it that these Conservatives want, Mr. Speaker? More or less? That's not clear. We're going to support Canadians.
L'honorable député de Louis.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's all very well to talk about inflation, but the reality is that Canadians are facing the worst inflation crisis in 40 years, which is hitting them hard and means that they can't even put food on the table. And what's even worse is that next year, things will be even worse. 4 Canadian universities have published a report stating that prices will go up by up to 10% next year. That's $1,100 more per family. That's a lot for people who are already struggling. Will this government commit to not increasing taxes during a period of inflation? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind my colleague that his party is not even capable of recognizing the reality of climate change. The impacts of the climate crisis are real. Just ask people who live in Gaspésie. This year we had Fiona, and past year we've had other huge storms. We need to act to protect our planet. We owe it to future generations. And one thing is clear. We shouldn't take lessons from climate skeptics. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, what my colleague just said is completely false. And I would invite her to apologize. Once again. After the odious things she said on Gaspésie Radio a few weeks ago. In any case, that's her business. But what is all Canadians' business is inflation. We are the only G7 countries that is increasing taxes during an inflationary period. This Liberal Canada is doing that. Will this government, can this minister reply, will the government increase taxes next year, yes or no? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, even if we tripled the number of Conservative politicians who take the climate crisis seriously, that number would still be 0. But no need to worry, because on this side of the House, we care about the planet, we care about our children and future generations. We will take action for Canadians, for the planet, And unlike the Conservatives, we're not going to spend our time complaining and not actually giving results.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has shown a serious disrespect to all Canadians. He seems to think that he can skirt the responsibility that comes with elected office by blaming global trends. Mr. Speaker, Canadians elected him to govern and help Canadians through record costs of everything, which he can do today by eliminating the carbon tax. Mr. Speaker, will this Prime Minister take leadership, assume some responsibility, and cancel the carbon tax? Yes or no?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And instead of fighting inflation and making life more affordable for Canadians, you know what the Conservatives want to do, Mr. Speaker? They want to make it harder for Canadians to save for their retirement. They want to make it harder for Canadians who lose their jobs. And instead of fighting climate change, Mr. Speaker, they want to make pollution free again on just about every measure that Canadians care about, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives are absent. We will always have Canadians' backs, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Mr. Speaker, Liberals don't have an environmental plan. It's a tax plan. Liberals have not met a single target that they have set. As is typical with this government, another non-answer. I asked for a yes or no, not more empty rhetoric. I'll provide the government with another opportunity to answer the simple question. Will they cancel the carbon tax? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague has made a suggestion that we haven't hit a target. The target that we have set is for 2030, so if she's got a DeLorean and a flux capacitor, I invite her to jump in and travel back in time. The reality is we are on track to reduce our emissions because of the investments that we're making. We are bringing pollution down, and we found a way to make it more affordable for families at the same time. Every step of the way, we will do what it takes to protect our environment for our kids and our grandkids and to advance measures that support affordability at the same time. This is the path forward, Mr. Speaker. If the Conservatives don't join us on it, they'll enjoy sitting in opposition for a very long time.
The Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians don't need a DeLorean to know how much of a failure this Liberal government has been when it comes to the environment. They haven't met a single target. They haven't planted a single tree. But, Mr. Speaker, what they have done is raise the costs on everyday Canadians. They're making it $1,400 more costly to buy groceries this year, another $1,100 per family next year. 1.5 million Canadians relied on a food bank in a single month. 500,000 of those were children. All of this is being driven up by the Liberal carbon tax. Will they do the right thing and remove the carbon tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, and as usual, the Conservatives are spreading misinformation. Mr. Speaker, we are on target to make our targets, and we will get there come hell or high water, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what is the Conservative record? They cut $350 million from the Environment and Climate Change budget, Mr. Speaker. They blew up Kyoto.
I just want to make sure you're done shouting. Okay. Very good. I don't know what it is, but I think they want to hear your answer over again. Right from the top, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I said before, emissions are going down. We're on track to make our targets. But the Conservative record, Mr. Speaker, is abysmal. You know what they did, Mr. Speaker? The first thing they did when they came to power was to cancel the National Child Care Program. But the second thing they did was to blow up the Kyoto Climate Accord. And, Mr. Speaker, they are now blaming us for their lack of action. Mr. Speaker, for their troubles, Mr. Speaker, they won the Fossil of the Day Award, they won the Fossil of the Year Award, and the Colossal Fossil Award, Mr. Speaker.